I'm very pleased to introduce my friend Marco Fiorletta, who is doing his PhD in philosophy at the University of Vienna with Jakob Deibel, with a project about Hölderlin and in particular with topics of nature, God, and world. Okay, I give you immediately the word, so please.
Thank you, Maurizio. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I wanted to thank again the organizing committee and Maurizio, especially, and also sorry because of the presentation. I decided last minute to present something, so sorry, Maurizio. I brought some problems with me. So my paper text is titled "From a Line in Friedrich Hölderlin's manuscript Homburger Foliet, denn gute Dinge drei, because of good things come in three." This quote takes or interprets the German proverb "Alle gute Dinge drei," all good things come into three. This quote shows already deep presence in Hölderlin of a Trinitarian perspective. The more I worked on this topic, the more I realized how many Trinitarian themes one could open in Hölderlin. I therefore decided to focus only on selected motifs within two hymns, the Einzige, the only one, and Patmos. What interested me principally is the connection between what I will focus on this paper is the mediation of the divine persons and the linguistic play, the linguistic perspective, and the radical co-belonging of these two elements. To analyze this, my presentation is divided into three parts. After some preliminary remarks, I will look at passages from Hölderlin's theoretical writings to sketch a possible triadic logical functioning, then turn to analysis of sections of the Einzige before moving to Patmos. These two hymns, the Einzige and Patmos, composed roughly between 18 and 1806, are central for grasping Hölderlin's Trinitarian thinking. The Einzige represents the instance of mediation, seen through the Einzigkeit, uniqueness of Christ, and the latter, Patmos, the instance of the language, in the sense of the relational capacity of the spirit as language. Just to have a first understanding of these two hymns, the first one, the Einzige, the first draft appeared in the Homburger Foliet around 1802. We have many versions of this hymn. We have this first version called Widmungsfassung, and then we have other. So we have this first version in the Homburger Foliet, and then we have two other versions. They are very heterogeneous. And I will focus on the first one. Then in Patmos, in this case, we have the Widmungsfassung of 1803, and then we have two other versions. It's important to say that they are really complicated from a textual point of view, and that there is no ultimate closed text, so we can say this is the real version, there is the other one, and they remain an ongoing open project. So we'll focus on passages, but it's important to have this in mind so that we can always move and have many interpretations, many perspectives on a single point. To approach the triadic, what I call the triadic in the theoretical writings, we must clarify the close relation between the problem of unity diversity, and this will be central in the Einzige as the Vermittlung mediation problem, and the essential role of the language in these writings. Hölderlin knows the Augustinian tradition really well, filtered through the long Neoplatonic line that runs from Proclus to Augustine into later Christianity. In this tradition, the relation between the universal, the one, and the particular, the parts, the individual is central. Hölderlin explicitly reprises these themes and engages them in precisely these years. One example is the famous letter 231 of around 1801, the same years of these two hymns. He says it to the brother, and he insists on the relation between the one and the individual, with a question, what is more important, to question about the one or to pose a question about the individual? This is the biggest strike in the world, the biggest fight in the world. This question about the one and the individuals. Other examples in some textual fragments of his period, he writes about the relation between the figure of Christ and that of Mary, and he writes in a small note, Unterschieden is good, differential is something good, or talking about God, how to interpret God, he writes, what we understand is Gott pure and with difference, Gott rein und mit Unterscheidung. While Hölderlin is more interested in this unity as principle, he consistently attends to what diversity and individuality represents. The one as divided in itself is a constant thought in Hölderlin, which accompanies him into the late writings. Starting from the text Sign of Tile, we encounter the tension provoked on the one hand by a subject confronted with an object as opposed to itself, and on the other by sin that is in itself relation. This relation also produces judgment and opposition as such. The question we must now pose is how to interpret this relation. Is this being that is also a division, to be thought as one, as two, or as three? So I move to the first quote. Judgment, in the highest and strictest sense, is the original separation of object and subject. And then is the Urteilung, the original separation, and then also the being that expresses the connection with subject and object. The second passage I wanted to read is from the Dichter, and here is the important concept, the one of harmoniously opposed. This concept is presented in the Dichter and offers a way to carry this discussion of this opposition of two or three insofar to another level, insofar as its theoretical core already contains the problem. If on the one hand we can pose this question, so we can pose the question about the opposition and of the harmony, from a logical perspective, we are aware that this is insufficient because we are thinking about the triadic and not the Trinitarian. So we need to move to another, what I call the instrument, that is the poetry. In this case, the language is the locus of relation. The language is not a resolution, but relation itself. The triadic, in this sense, in shifting towards language, becomes not the thinking of a possible reconciliation, but the thinking of relational creativeness itself. He writes in the same text, the product of this creative reflection is language. The triadic, the third, does not emerge as the conclusion of a logic reasoning, but a linguistic event. It appears in language, in written form, in poetic imagery, as the ternary structure where consonances and also, more important, dissonances are present in the writing itself. This is part of the nature of poetry. Poetry does not offer, in this case, what we will see in Einzige and Patmos, does not offer systematic exposition of the three divine persons. We do not encounter a coherent theology of Father, Son, and Spirit. What poetry does is to show and understand the function of these figures in the poetry, in the language itself. It's not a dogmatic trinity, but poetic persons that operate, appear, and relate, starting from what we will see at determinate place, each with its own name and a mythic role in history. In this sense, is how also in the Einzige and Patmos. Okay, I skip to the next part, and we start reading the Einzige, some parts from the Einzige, and the poem opens with a central question. And so I have on the left the German, on the right the English translation. This was the best translation I found, but we can discuss it. And it starts with I read from the English, what is it that binds me to these ancient blessed shores, that I love them more than my country? So it starts with this question, was ist es? This was ist es goes both to a general question, so what is it? And also to the title itself of the poem, the title of the Einzige. So what is the Einzige? Already setting the upset of attention between two loved objects. In the first strophe, in this case, it's between Greece and the fatherland. Later in the poem it will become between Greece, with its plurality of the divine, and Christ. To understand the relation of the Son then, we must first So to understand the relation of the Son, we must first understand what's the role of the Father. Just briefly, for Hölderlin, the Father has the role, in the poetry of Hölderlin, the role of commanding, deciding, reigning. This is his principal task. He is understood as God the Father in his paternal function of command. The Father can also be understood as the one from whom all proceeds, as we said before, connected with the Neoplatonic conception. But what is important is that the Father, he never reigns alone. This means the Father's necessity to command, yes, because he reigns and acts, but he doesn't do it alone. So there is this necessity of a plurality. And this plurality are the so-called half gods, seen in their brotherhood, so being brothers, and in their common capacity to mediate the divine in determined spatial and temporal coordinates. So there are three half-gods, here in this case in the Einzige, so Heracles, Dionysus, and Jesus. Each one of these brothers has a different role in the mediation of the divine in the earth, and in this case in poetry. English poetry. Amid this presence of different forms of the divine, one figure stands out, Jesus, described as follows: Es handelt aber an einen die Liebe, but love clings to one. The experience is that of clinging, of holding fast. Here, to one, so the an einem, to one is to be understood as the only one, der Einzige, Christ, but also as the one properly so called in the sense of the Neoplatonic one. So we can understand in both this direction. So in the sense that we love the one in the sense of the only one, but also is possible a connection with the one. It allows clinging to the only one at the same time to the one. One may read this as Christ in the Eine, but also in the Hungary. Christ's role appears in this mediation within pluralism and in a tension between the possibility of a further opening to the diverse form of the divine and also the difficulty of doing so. This experience is described as, on the one hand, gewaltig, violent, because the role of Christ is also the one of an absolute love to the only one. So it's absolutizing. And then he speaks from the perspective of the Greek God, saying that they are jealous. Maybe they might be. I feel something. So he knows and talks about these two perspectives, the Greek God and Christ, at the same time giving them questioning about the one, questioning about Christ, the only one, and saying that yet some sense of shame keeps me from comparing worldly man to you. This weltliche man, worldly man, are these alcohols. There is some sort of shame when I do this comparison. So I want to do it, I need to do it, but at the same time, I feel some sort of shame. There is then also a difference between these two figures who, unlike Christ, so Heracles and Dionysus, fulfill their destiny, intervene upon the earth, and then disappear. This is the point of the most important point of this division. At a certain point, then there is Christ who loves absolutely and violently. It is a mediation not merely communicative but historical, which makes possible unification and the discussion of the kinship of the gods themselves. This is the paradox of the role of Christ in his fraternity. On the one hand, Christ's love is absolute, also in the sense of absolutizing, yet at the same time it enables the communality of his brothers. If the others were upon the earth and then departed, Christ has likewise, so he is in the earth and then departs, but with a very precise role. The possibility of the repetition of this history of departing and returning, of going away and returning. And this by means is the spirit, to which now I turn with Patmos. So the question is this vision of a multiplicity of the divine a pluralistic openness? Or maybe we can see it as two distinct spheres, parallel, which need one another. So the Greek God and Christ as the possibility of this communion of these two spheres, and at the same time the complexity of this. Let us now approach Patmos and the next point. At the determinate point in the history, Christ appears. His entry into history changes the dynamics. The old principle of beauty and plasticity falls away. We no longer experience the immediate and positive presence of the divine. but the memory of Christ, absence and death. In this moment, he sends the Spirit. So we can now start entering in Patmos. Drum sagt ihnen den Geist. For this reason, he sent them the Spirit in this moment of decision and changing in history, in the going from the ancient to the modern time. There are several lenses through which to read Patmos. My brief reading focuses on the role of the Spirit, understood in its relation to an apocalyptic history and its hermeneutic principle. As important, Patmos is dedicated to the landscape of Olomouc. The landscape belonged to the current of the Pietism, of the Bibelfrömmigkeit, biblical Pietism, which showed the fidelity to the text itself. In the scheme, Hölderlin explores how to conceive this fidelity to scripture in relation to poetry. Patmos, as the title suggests, is also the place where the concrete local meets revelation, bringing an apocalyptic sense into history. So we have this first sense of apocalyptic, we see also in the title, in this conception, but then also the sense of story that I already talked about, that is called with a division, scission in the history, in the moment when Christ leaves the earth. And then we have this other quote, where it's connected to the appearing of Christ. So he appears another time, and at the same time this appearance is called with the Scheiden, this division that happens in the history. In the second version of the Einzige, Christ, Hölderlin tries to explain the difference of Christ with the other roles. And he says that, okay, this is the role of Hercules, this is what Dionysus does, but Christ, Christus ist aber das Ende. Christ is the end. And this not in Heidegger's sense of the last God, but maybe as a final presence in history, in the sense of a final judgment. History is read from Christ as end, and the Spirit becomes this happening of history. And this question is introduced by, this theme is introduced by a question in Patmos, when Hölderlin asks, what is this? What is this? And he tries to explain it with as the winnower scooping with his shovel and swinging it. So really bringing this apocalyptic sense connected with the themes from theodicy. And the Spirit assumes that this function and this moment of theodicy distinguish the clear from the obscure and guiding the time of maturation. I'll try to go a bit faster. Yet, passage into history is possible only by following the writings and the word. The Wurf names the unexpected possibility of the fecundity of writing itself, which emerges only in and as history as interpretation. And here the Spirit comes into play. And now we're in the last strophe of Patmos, that's very, very famous. Der Vater aber liebt, der Überall waltet am meisten, das gepflegt werden der feste Buchstab und beständes gut gedeutet, dem folgt deutscher Gesang. So, Hölderlin does place on two planes. On the one hand, fidelity to the writings, Schrift, and on the other hand, the poetic musical element of the Gesang as the moment of mediation, Vermittlung, in the proper sense of understanding. And so the Father, it is the Father himself who loves this proceeding that this happens, this Vermittlung. This tension allows us to rethink the relation between writing, interpretation, and spirit. It is the relation between letter and spirit that is balanced. The letter kills, but the spirit gives life. The hermeneutic principle thus concludes a movement that begins with the Father, proceeds with the question of the continuity of the Son, in the sense of particularly of the uniqueness of the Son, unique mediation in its complexity that we've seen, and arrives finally at the Spirit who, in its movement, is history and end, in a sense of hermeneutical understanding of the letter through the Son. Thank you.